A cruel stepmother kicked her stepson out, but when the father came home, the truth exposed a family secret that couldn't be ignored. The Carter household had never been warm, but at least it had been functional. That was, until Claire Carter decided that her 14-year-old stepson, Liam, no longer had a place in their home. Liam's father, Michael Carter, and Claire's husband of 2 years, was away on a week-long business trip to secure a career-changing deal. He had no idea that a storm was brewing at home. Liam was a quiet, thoughtful boy, still struggling to recover from the loss of his mother, Emily, to cancer 3 years earlier. Claire, with her sharp tongue and need for control, was his polar opposite. From the moment she moved into the house, tension had been a constant. Claire saw Liam's quietness as defiance, a subtle rebellion against her authority, while Liam retreated further into himself, yearning for the gentle warmth his mother had once brought to the house. Michael, caught between his grieving son and his eager-to-please new wife, tried his best to keep the peace. He believed, naively, that time would soften Claire's sharp edges and that Liam would eventually come to accept her as part of the family. How wrong he had been. As Michael boarded his flight for Los Angeles, his mind was focused on the meetings ahead, not the home he was leaving behind. His last memory of Liam was a barely-there wave from the boy, his shoulders hunched. Claire's bright smile had been the image of composure as she kissed him goodbye at the door. If he had been paying closer attention, he might have noticed the frustration flickering in her eyes or the tension in Liam's reluctant wave. But he hadn't. And so, Michael left, unaware that his absence would set in motion events that would tear his family apart. From the day Claire had moved into the Carter household, she felt like an outsider. The house was full of Emily's presence, her photographs on the walls, her favorite dishes in the cupboards, even her scent lingering faintly in the guest room where Claire had first stayed. Liam's every action, his very existence, seemed like a reminder that she could never truly replace Emily in Michael's life. At first, Claire had tried to make an effort. She had cooked meals, bought Liam new clothes, and invited him to join her on errands. But Liam's guarded silence and distant demeanor wore on her. Each quiet, no thank you, or indifferent shrug chipped away at her patience. Soon, her offers became less frequent, her voice sharper, and her kindness replaced with pointed critiques. "Do you think that shirt fits you?" she had asked him just last week, watching as he hesitated on the way to school. "You look like you pulled it out of the laundry hamper." Liam had glanced down at his shirt, the same one his mom had bought him 2 years ago, and flushed. He hadn't responded, simply ducking his head and hurrying out the door. Moments like those gave Claire a sense of power she couldn't find elsewhere in the house. The first day after Michael's departure passed in tense silence. Liam spent most of his time in his room, escaping into books and sketching while Claire kept herself busy with housework. By the second evening, the unspoken tension finally boiled over. It started with something small, an overturned glass of milk at the dinner table. Liam had reached too quickly for his plate, and the glass tipped, spilling across the table and dripping onto the pristine rug beneath. Claire's fork clattered onto her plate as she shot to her feet. "Are you serious?" she snapped, grabbing a napkin and throwing it onto the puddle. "Can you not go one day without making a mess?" Liam froze, his face reddening as he grabbed a napkin of his own. "I didn't mean to." "That's always your excuse," Claire cut him off, her voice rising. "You didn't mean to. You never mean to, but somehow everything you do makes my life harder." Liam's hands stilled as he stared down at the table. His heart thudded painfully in his chest. "I said I'm sorry," he whispered. Claire scoffed, tossing the soaked napkin into the sink. "Sorry doesn't clean the rug. Sorry doesn't make this house any easier to live in. You're 14, Liam. When are you going to stop acting like a helpless little boy and start contributing something useful?" Her words hung in the air, heavy and cutting. Liam blinked rapidly, willing himself not to cry. He had learned by now that tears only made things worse. Claire wasn't done. As she paced the kitchen, her voice took on an edge Liam hadn't heard before. "You know what? I've had it. I'm tired of cleaning up after you, of tiptoeing around your sulking, of being treated like I don't belong in my own home." Liam looked up, his stomach twisting with unease. "What do you mean?" Claire stopped and turned to him, her arms crossed tightly. "I mean," she said slowly, "that it's time you learned how the real world works. If you're so independent, maybe it's time you figured out how to live without me constantly cleaning up your messes." Liam's breath caught in his throat. "I don't understand." "You will," Claire said coldly. "Pack your things. You're leaving." Liam stared at Claire, the weight of her words pressing down on him like a physical blow. For a moment he thought he must have misheard. Surely she couldn't mean it. "Pack your things," she repeated, her voice flat and unwavering. "I want you out of this house by tonight." His heart pounded in his chest as he stammered, "Where am I supposed to go?" "That's not my problem," Claire snapped, turning away from him to wipe the kitchen counter as if the conversation was over. "Figure it out. Maybe then you'll stop taking everything for granted." Liam's mind raced, his thoughts a whirlwind of panic and disbelief. He opened his mouth to plead, but stopped himself. Claire's back was rigid, her hands scrubbing furiously at an invisible stain on the counter. She wasn't going to change her mind. In his room, Liam stared at his small duffel bag, his hands trembling as he grabbed the first things within reach. A pair of jeans, a few shirts, his favorite hoodie. He paused by the nightstand, his eyes falling on the framed photo of his mother. Emily's smile in the photo was warm and kind, the way he remembered her before the cancer had drained her strength. She had been his anchor, the one person who made him feel safe. Without her, everything had fallen apart. He picked up the frame and gently placed it in the bag, tucking it between his clothes for protection. His chest ached as he zipped the bag shut, the sound loud in the stillness of the room. When he returned downstairs, Claire was waiting by the front door, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. She glanced at the duffel bag in his hand, then at his face, her expression cold and unmoving. "Good," she said briskly. "Now go." Liam hesitated. "Please, Claire," he said quietly. "Don't do this. I'll try harder, I promise." Her hand shot up, cutting him off. "I've made my decision, Liam. This isn't your home anymore." Before he could say another word, she opened the door and stepped aside. The icy wind of the night swept into the hallway, and Liam shivered as he stepped out onto the porch. The door slammed shut behind him, the sound echoing in the stillness. He turned back, staring at the darkened windows, a lump rising in his throat. For a moment, he considered knocking, begging her to let him back in, but he knew it would be useless. He was on his own now. The streets were eerily quiet as Liam walked, the duffel bag slung over his shoulder. His breath came out in visible puffs, the cold biting at his skin through his hoodie. He hadn't thought this far ahead. He didn't know where he was going or what he was going to do. He passed the park where he used to play basketball with his friends, the empty court now bathed in the dim glow of a street lamp. He thought about going to Chris's house, but the idea of explaining what had happened made his stomach twist. What would he even say? Instead, he kept walking, his feet carrying him toward the edge of town. He didn't know where he was headed, but anywhere was better than standing still. Inside the house, Claire stood by the window, watching Liam's figure grow smaller and smaller in the distance. Her lips were pressed into a thin line, her hands gripping the curtains tightly. She told herself she had done the right thing. He needed to learn. He needed to stop clinging to the past and relying on everyone else to pick up the pieces. But, as his silhouette disappeared into the night, a flicker of doubt crossed her mind. She shook it off. This was for the best, for both of them. Liam found himself at the entrance to the park, the shadows stretching long and dark before him. He sank onto a bench, setting his bag beside him. His hands curled into fists on his lap as tears blurred his vision. He couldn't call his dad. He couldn't go back. For the first time in his life, Liam felt truly alone. Liam's breath fogged in the cold air as he sat on the park bench, clutching his duffel bag to his chest. The night was eerily quiet, the hum of distant cars on the highway the only sound breaking the stillness. He shivered, pulling his hoodie tighter around himself. The thin fabric did little to ward off the biting cold. For the first time in his life, Liam truly felt the weight of being alone. He had always thought of his house, even with Claire in it, as a place he could retreat to. Now, that safety net was gone, ripped away by the slam of a door and the cutting finality of her words. This isn't your home anymore. His stomach growled, a sharp reminder that he hadn't eaten since the disastrous dinner. He ignored it, pushing himself to his feet. He couldn't stay here. The park, with its familiar swings and slides, felt like a mocking echo of a happier time. He started walking, his footsteps crunching softly against the frosty ground. As Liam wandered through the quiet streets, the neon glow of a 24-hour convenience store caught his eye. He lingered outside, staring through the glass windows at the shelves lined with food. His stomach twisted painfully at the sight of sandwiches and snacks, but he had no money. His pockets were empty, his phone charger useless without an outlet. "Hey, kid." The voice startled him. He turned quickly, his heart racing, to see a man standing a few feet away. The man was older, his beard flecked with gray, his clothes worn but clean. He carried a small backpack slung over one shoulder, his other hand holding a steaming cup of coffee. "You all right?" the man asked, his voice rough but not unkind. Liam hesitated, clutching his bag tighter. "Yeah," he said quietly. The man's eyes narrowed, scanning Liam from head to toe. "You don't look all right. You're out here alone?" Liam didn't answer. His pulse quickened as the man took a step closer. "Relax," the man said, raising his free hand. "Name's Robert. I'm not going to hurt you." Liam's shoulders remained tense, but something in the man's tone eased his fear. "Liam," he said after a pause. Robert nodded, taking a sip of his coffee. "You hungry, Liam?" Liam hesitated again, but finally nodded. Robert gestured toward a bench near the store. "Come on. I've got a sandwich in my bag. You can have it." Liam followed him cautiously, his footsteps lagging behind. Robert sat on the bench and pulled a sandwich from his backpack, holding it out to Liam. The boy hesitated, his gaze darting between the sandwich and the man. "Suit yourself," Robert said, setting it on the bench. "But it's not doing me any good sitting there." Liam's hunger won out. He grabbed the sandwich and unwrapped it quickly, taking a bite before his second thoughts could stop him. The bread was slightly stale, but he didn't care. He ate in silence, his eyes on the ground. "You've got that look?" Robert said after a while. "What look?" Liam asked through a mouthful of food. "The one people get when they've been kicked out of somewhere." Liam stiffened. "I'm fine," he muttered. Robert didn't push. He leaned back, his hands resting on his knees. "You don't owe me your story," he said. "But if you're out here for the first time, you'll want some advice." Liam glanced at him. "Like what?" "Like, don't trust everyone who offers you food." Robert smirked, though his tone was serious. "Not everyone's as nice as me." Liam said nothing, his hands tightening around the sandwich. "You don't have a plan, do you?" Robert asked. Liam shook his head slowly. Robert sighed, scratching at his beard. "You should head to the shelter on 3rd Street. They'll give you a place to sleep, maybe a hot meal. Better than wandering out here." "Thanks," Liam said softly. While Liam navigated the dark streets, Claire sat on the couch, a glass of wine in her hand. The house was eerily quiet, a stillness that should have felt comforting but instead left her unsettled. She told herself she had done the right thing. Liam had been impossible, ungrateful, uncooperative, always looking at her with those judgmental eyes. But as the minutes ticked by, doubt began to creep in. She tried to shake it off, her fingers tightening around the glass. "He'll be fine," she thought. "He's probably at a friend's house by now." The sound of her phone ringing broke the silence. She glanced at the screen and froze. It was Michael. For a moment she considered letting it go to voicemail, but the thought of him calling back again made her stomach churn. She answered, her voice carefully composed. "Michael." "Hey," he said, his tone cheerful. "Just calling to check in. How's everything at home?" "Fine," she said quickly. "Everything's fine." There was a pause, then Michael chuckled. "You sound tense. Is Liam giving you trouble?" "No," Claire said, her voice tight. He's been quiet." Michael hummed thoughtfully. "That's good. I was worried he might act out while I was gone." Claire forced a laugh. "No, nothing like that." The conversation ended shortly after, but Claire's unease lingered. She set her glass down and stared at the empty room, her reflection flickering faintly in the darkened window. For the first time, she wondered if Michael would see things the way she did, or if he'd blame her when he found out the truth. Hours later, Liam wandered aimlessly, his breath fogging in the chilly night air. The shelter Robert had mentioned was a distant thought, overshadowed by exhaustion and the gnawing ache in his chest. He sank onto another bench, pulling his knees to his chest as tears welled in his eyes. In the distance, the faint sound of laughter reached his ears, an unfamiliar reminder of the warmth he no longer had. What would Dad say if he saw me like this? Liam wondered, his vision blurring. He didn't know it yet, but at that very moment, Michael was beginning to suspect that something was wrong. Michael Carter leaned back in the stiff hotel chair, scrolling through his emails. His phone lay on the desk beside him, the faint glow of the screen illuminating the darkened room. The conference had gone well so far, but something about his conversation with Claire earlier lingered in his mind. She had sounded off. Her usually composed tone had an edge to it, like she was trying to mask something. He picked up the phone again, scrolling to the text messages he had exchanged with Liam earlier in the week. The last one had been 2 days ago, a short reply from Liam about a school project. Nothing since. That wasn't unusual. Liam wasn't much of a texter. But now, with Claire's strained voice replaying in his head, a sliver of doubt crept in. The knock on Claire's door came late, just as she was settling into bed. She frowned, glancing at the clock. It was nearly midnight. With a sigh, she pulled on her robe and padded downstairs, irritation bubbling beneath the surface. Who could possibly be visiting at this hour? When she opened the door, she found herself face to face with Mrs. Turner, the neighbor who lived 2 houses down. The elderly woman's brow was furrowed, her sharp eyes studying Claire intently. "Good evening, Claire," Mrs. Turner said, her tone brisk. "I hope I'm not intruding, but I couldn't help noticing something." Claire forced a tight smile. "What is it, Mrs. Turner?" "I haven't seen Liam in a few days," Mrs. Turner said, tilting her head. "He's usually out on his bike after school, but I haven't spotted him lately. Is he feeling all right?" Claire's stomach twisted. She hadn't expected anyone to notice Liam's absence so quickly. "Oh, he's fine," she said smoothly. "He's just staying with a friend for a few days while Michael's out of town. You know how teenagers are. They prefer their friends' company." Mrs. Turner's sharp gaze didn't waver. "I see. Well, I hope he's doing okay. If he needs anything, you know where I am." "Of course," Claire said, her tone clipped. "Thank you, Mrs. Turner." As soon as the door closed, Claire leaned against it, her heart pounding. She hadn't expected questions so soon. She told herself it didn't matter. Michael didn't need to know, and nosy neighbors wouldn't change her decision. But the seed of unease Mrs. Turner had planted began to grow. The next morning, Michael sat at the hotel breakfast table, nursing a cup of coffee and staring at his phone. He'd called Claire twice since their conversation last night, but she hadn't answered. That wasn't like her. She was usually quick to respond, especially when he was away. Finally, he dialed another number. Mrs. Turner answered on the second ring. "Michael," she said, sounding surprised. "What a pleasant surprise. Are you back in town?" "No," Michael said, his voice tight. "I'm still at the conference. I just wanted to check in. Everything's okay at home, right?" There was a pause. "Well, I did stop by to speak with Claire last night," Mrs. Turner said cautiously. "I noticed I hadn't seen Liam around, and I was curious." Michael's grip on his phone tightened. "What did she say?" "She said Liam was staying with a friend," Mrs. Turner replied, her voice careful. "But, Michael, it didn't sit right with me. She seemed off. I thought you should know." Michael's stomach dropped. "Thank you, Mrs. Turner," he said, standing abruptly. "I'll take care of it." The call ended, and Michael's heart pounded in his chest. Something was wrong. He packed his suitcase hastily, his hands trembling. His flight wasn't until the evening, but he knew he couldn't wait. He called the airline, paying extra for the next available flight. As he boarded the plane, his mind raced with possibilities. Liam wasn't the type to stay with friends without telling him. Had something happened? The thought that Claire might have something to do with Liam's absence crossed his mind, but he quickly dismissed it. She wouldn't. Would she? By the time Michael's taxi pulled into the driveway, the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the house. He barely noticed as he hauled his suitcase out and strode to the front door, his jaw clenched. The house felt eerily quiet as he stepped inside. "Claire?" he called, his voice echoing in the stillness. She appeared in the doorway of the living room, her expression carefully neutral. "Michael, you're home early." "Where's Liam?" he demanded, skipping any pretense of pleasantries. Claire hesitated, her fingers tightening around the edge of the doorway. "I told you, he's staying with a friend." "Which friend?" Michael pressed, his voice sharp. "What's their name? Where do they live?" Her silence spoke louder than words. Michael's chest tightened as he took a step closer. "Claire, where is my son?" He left," she said finally, her voice faltering. "He was being disrespectful. I couldn't handle it anymore." "You couldn't handle it?" Michael repeated, his voice rising. "So you just let him leave? You didn't think to call me, to tell me what was going on?" Claire folded her arms defensively. "He's 14, Michael. He's old enough to figure things out. He'll come back when he's ready." Michael stared at her in disbelief, his anger boiling over. "You kicked him out, didn't you?" Claire's jaw tightened, but she didn't deny it. "He needed to learn." "Learn what?" Michael roared. "That his stepmother doesn't care about him? That he can't even count on his own home to be safe?" Michael turned away from her, his breathing ragged. He stormed upstairs to Liam's room, his heart sinking as he took in the empty bed, the neat stack of books on the desk. His eyes landed on the trash can by the door, and his blood ran cold. Among the crumpled papers was a photograph of Emily, torn at the edges. Michael picked it up carefully, his hands trembling. It was the photo Liam had always kept on his nightstand. Something inside him snapped. He marched back downstairs, his expression dark. "If anything happens to my son, Claire, I swear you'll regret it." Without waiting for her response, he grabbed his keys and stormed out of the house. He didn't know where Liam was, but he was going to find him, no matter what it took. Michael gripped the steering wheel tightly, his knuckles white as he navigated the dimly lit streets of the town. His mind raced with questions, each one more terrifying than the last. Where could Liam have gone? Was he safe? Did he have enough to eat? The thought of his son wandering the streets, cold and alone, made Michael's chest ache with guilt. He slammed his hand against the wheel, the sharp sound echoing in the confines of the car. "How could I have been so blind?" he thought. He had trusted Claire, believed in her ability to care for Liam while he was away. That trust now felt like a cruel joke. Michael's first stop was the town park. It had always been Liam's favorite place when he was younger, a spot where he would spend hours playing basketball or sketching under the shade of the big oak tree. But the park was empty now, the swings swaying gently in the cold night breeze. He parked the car and stepped out, his breath visible in the chilly air. "Liam!" he called, his voice cutting through the silence. The only response was the distant sound of a dog barking. His next stop was Chris's house, Liam's closest friend. He knocked on the door, his heart pounding. Chris's mother answered, her expression turning to concern when she saw Michael's face. "Michael, what's wrong?" "Is Liam here?" Michael asked, his voice strained. "No, I haven't seen him. Is everything okay?" Michael forced a tight smile. "I'm just looking for him. If he shows up or calls, please let me know." Chris appeared in the doorway, his brow furrowed. "Is Liam missing?" Michael hesitated, not wanting to alarm the boy. "He's just not home right now. Let me know if you hear from him, okay?" Chris nodded, his worry evident. As Michael drove through the streets, he replayed his conversation with Claire, each word fueling his anger. He stopped at the town's homeless shelter next, a small brick building tucked away near the edge of town. Inside, the air was warm and filled with the faint smell of soup. A volunteer greeted him at the door, her kind face creasing with concern as Michael explained his situation. "We haven't seen anyone matching that description tonight," she said, glancing at the clipboard in her hands. "But I'll keep an eye out. Leave your number, and we'll call if we see him." Michael scribbled his phone number on the sheet, his stomach twisting with frustration. He thanked her and stepped back out into the cold. As he stood by his car trying to decide his next move, his phone buzzed. It was a text message from Mrs. Turner. "I saw a boy who looked like Liam near the convenience store on Main Street earlier tonight," it read. "Not sure, but thought you'd want to know." Michael's heart leapt. He jumped into the car and sped toward Main Street, his hands gripping the wheel so tightly they ached. The convenience store was mostly empty when Michael arrived, the fluorescent lights casting a harsh glow on the parking lot. He scanned the area, his eyes darting to every shadow, every figure. And then he saw him. Liam sat on a bench near the corner of the building, his duffel bag slumped at his feet. His shoulders were hunched, his hoodie pulled tight against the cold. "Liam!" Michael called, his voice breaking with relief. Liam's head snapped up, his wide eyes filled with both hope and fear. "Dad?" he whispered. Michael was at his side in an instant, pulling him into a tight embrace. "Oh, thank God," he murmured, his voice thick with emotion. "I've been looking everywhere for you." Liam stiffened at first, but then melted into his father's arms, his body trembling. "I'm sorry," he choked out. "I didn't know where else to go." Michael pulled back, his hands on Liam's shoulders. "This isn't your fault, Liam. None of this is your fault. I'm so sorry I wasn't there when you needed me." Back in the car, the warmth of the heater slowly brought color back to Liam's pale cheeks. He clutched the photo of his mother that he had taken from his bag, his fingers running along the cracked edges of the frame. "Claire kicked me out," he said quietly, his voice barely audible. Michael's jaw tightened, his knuckles white against the steering wheel. "I know," he said, his voice heavy with guilt, "and she'll answer for it. But right now, all that matters is you." They drove in silence for a while, the hum of the engine the only sound between them. As they neared the house, Michael glanced at Liam. "Do you want to go back, or would you rather stay somewhere else tonight?" Liam hesitated. "Will she be there?" Michael's grip on the wheel tightened. "Not for long." When they pulled into the driveway, the house was dark. Michael escorted Liam inside, his protective arm never leaving his son's shoulder. He helped Liam settle into his room before going downstairs to confront Claire. She was waiting for him in the living room, her arms crossed and her expression defiant. "You brought him back?" she said, her voice dripping with disdain. Michael's anger boiled over. "How dare you?" he said, his voice low and dangerous. "How dare you throw my son out of his own home? Do you have any idea what could have happened to him?" "He was impossible, Michael," Claire snapped. "Always sulking, always making everything harder. I couldn't take it anymore." "You couldn't take it?" Michael shot back. "He's a child, Claire. A grieving child who lost his mother. And instead of supporting him, you treated him like an inconvenience, like garbage. And you think that's acceptable?" Claire's confidence wavered, but she tried to stand her ground. "I thought—" "You didn't think," Michael interrupted, his voice rising. "You didn't think about his safety, his feelings, or what this would do to him. You only thought about yourself." Michael pointed toward the door. "Pack your things, Claire. You're leaving." Claire's mouth fell open. "You can't be serious." "I've never been more serious," Michael said, his tone final. "Get out of my house, and don't come back." As Claire stormed upstairs, her footsteps echoing through the house, Michael sank into the couch, his head in his hands. Upstairs, Liam lay awake, staring at the ceiling, a mix of relief and lingering fear swirling in his chest. The battle wasn't over, but for the first time, Liam felt a glimmer of hope. The next morning brought a quiet sense of relief to the Anderson household. The storm that had raged within its walls for months was finally clearing. Claire was gone. The bags she had angrily stuffed with her belongings were no longer in the hallway. The silence she left behind was not oppressive but comforting, like the calm after a thunderstorm. Michael sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee, staring out the window as the early morning light filtered through the trees. His thoughts were a jumble of guilt, anger, and determination. Upstairs, Liam was still asleep, his exhaustion from the past days keeping him under the covers longer than usual. Michael had called his boss earlier that morning to request an indefinite leave of absence. It had been met with hesitation, but Michael had been firm. Work could wait. His son needed him now more than ever. When Liam finally emerged from his room, the boy looked hesitant, as though he wasn't sure how to behave in this new, quieter house. Michael greeted him with a warm smile, pulling out a chair at the table. "Morning, kiddo. You hungry?" Liam nodded, his lips twitching in a tentative smile. "Yeah." Michael got to work, preparing a proper breakfast, pancakes, bacon, and eggs. It was the kind of breakfast he hadn't had time to make in months, but today nothing felt more important than showing Liam he was cared for. As they ate, Liam finally broke the silence. "Is she gone?" Michael nodded. "She won't be coming back." Liam's shoulders sagged with relief, but there was still a shadow in his eyes. "What happens now?" "We figure it out together," Michael said, his voice steady. "No more neglect, no more keeping things bottled up. You and me, okay?" Liam nodded, his gaze fixed on his plate. "Okay?" The days that followed were a mix of progress and challenges. Michael took on the role of a full-time father, something he hadn't done since Emily passed away. He helped Liam with homework, drove him to school, and spent their evenings watching movies or playing board games. Slowly, the walls that had built up between them began to come down. But healing wasn't linear. Some nights Liam would wake up from nightmares, the fear of abandonment gripping him tightly. Michael would sit by his bed, rubbing his back until he calmed down. Other times, Liam would withdraw into himself, the weight of everything he had endured pressing down on him. One evening, as they sat on the couch watching an old comedy, Michael noticed Liam staring at the framed photo of Emily on the mantel. "You miss her a lot, don't you?" Michael asked gently. Liam nodded, his throat tightening. "Yeah." Michael leaned back, his expression softening. "I do too. She was the best part of both our lives." For the first time in months, Liam felt like he could talk about his mother without fear of judgment or dismissal. They spent the rest of the evening sharing memories of Emily, laughing and crying together. It was a moment of connection that felt long overdue. At Mrs. Turner's suggestion, Michael enrolled Liam in therapy. At first, Liam was reluctant. The idea of opening up to a stranger about his feelings felt overwhelming. But after a few sessions with Dr. Patel, a warm and understanding therapist, Liam began to see the value in it. Dr. Patel encouraged Liam to express his emotions through art, something he had always enjoyed but abandoned during the tension with Claire. His sketches began to fill with life again, drawings of his mother, his friends, and even the house, which started to feel like home once more. Michael also joined some of the sessions, where he and Liam worked on rebuilding their trust. Dr. Patel helped Michael understand the impact his absence had on Liam and how he could be more present moving forward. About a month after Claire left, Michael received an unexpected call. It was Claire. Her voice was tentative, almost apologetic. "Michael, I just wanted to check in. How are you and Liam?" Michael's grip on the phone tightened. "We're fine," he said curtly. "Good," Claire replied. There was a long pause before she continued. "I've been thinking a lot about what happened, about what I did. I didn't handle things right, and I wanted to say I'm sorry." Michael didn't respond immediately. He glanced toward the living room where Liam was sketching by the fireplace. "It's not me you need to apologize to," he said finally. "It's Liam." "I know," Claire said, her voice heavy with regret. "If he'll let me, I'd like to apologize to him." Michael thought about it for a moment before replying, "That's up to him. I won't force it." Claire agreed, and the call ended. When Michael told Liam about it later, the boy seemed conflicted. "I don't know if I want to see her," he admitted. "That's okay," Michael said. "It's your choice. There's no rush." Liam ultimately decided to write Claire a letter, expressing his feelings without having to face her directly. It was a cathartic experience for him, allowing him to let go of some of the anger and sadness that had weighed him down. As the weeks turned into months, the Anderson household became a place of warmth and laughter once again. Liam's grades improved, and he started spending more time with friends. Michael, too, found a new balance, working fewer hours and dedicating more time to his son. One sunny afternoon, as they sat on the porch together, Liam turned to Michael with a small smile. "I think Mom would have been proud of us." Michael's throat tightened, but he nodded. "I think so too, buddy." The road ahead wasn't without its challenges, but for the first time in a long time, they faced it with hope. Together, they had built something stronger than what had been lost, a bond forged through pain, love, and resilience. The seasons changed, but the Anderson household remained steady. Winter's chill gave way to the soft, hopeful warmth of spring. The once tense home had transformed into a sanctuary, a place of laughter, learning, and healing. It wasn't perfect, but it was theirs. Liam sat cross-legged on the living room floor, his sketchbook open in his lap. He was working on a detailed pencil drawing of the park near their house, the same park where he had spent that lonely night months ago. But this time, his strokes were softer, more deliberate. The darkness he had felt back then was now tempered with a sense of belonging and safety. Across the room, Michael was on the couch, sipping coffee and reviewing blueprints for a smaller project he had recently taken on. His decision to scale back work had been a difficult one, but every glance at his son reminded him it was the right choice. They had both learned to value time together more than anything else. "Hey, Dad," Liam said, looking up from his sketchbook. "Can I show you this one?" Michael set his coffee down and leaned forward, his eyes lighting up as Liam handed him the drawing. "Wow," he said, studying the intricate lines and shading. "This is incredible. You've got real talent, you know that?" Liam's cheeks reddened, but his smile was genuine. "Thanks. I was thinking, maybe I could take an art class this summer, at the community center?" Michael grinned. "Absolutely. We'll sign you up first thing tomorrow." Later that evening, they stood together in the backyard, under the sky streaked with the deep purples and oranges of sunset. Michael held a small box in his hands, its contents carefully chosen for what they meant to both him and Liam. "This was your mom's," Michael said, opening the box to reveal a delicate locket. She wore it every day, even when she was sick. She said it reminded her of what mattered most: family. Liam reached out, his fingers brushing the cool metal of the locket. "It's beautiful." Michael fastened it around his son's neck. "I think she'd want you to have it now. A reminder that no matter what, she's always with us." Liam's eyes filled with tears, but they were tears of gratitude, not grief. "Thanks, Dad. I'll take good care of it." In the weeks that followed, they created a new tradition. Every Sunday evening, they would light a candle by Emily's photo and share stories about her. It wasn't a sad ritual, but a joyful one, a way to keep her spirit alive in their home. Liam loved hearing Michael's tales about Emily's sense of humor and determination, and he often added his own memories, filling the room with laughter and warmth. The house, once a battleground of tension and silence, had become a home again. As summer approached, their life found a rhythm that felt right. Liam began making plans for high school, talking excitedly about joining the art club and maybe even trying out for the basketball team. Michael encouraged him at every step, marveling at how his son had grown, not just physically, but emotionally. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching fireflies dance in the yard, Liam turned to his father. "I never thought things could be like this again," he said softly. "After everything that happened, I didn't think we'd feel like a real family." Michael put an arm around his son's shoulders, his voice steady and full of love. "We've always been a family, Liam. Sometimes life throws us challenges, but what matters is how we face them together. And look at us now, we're stronger than ever." Liam leaned into his father's embrace, his heart lighter than it had been in years. "Yeah, we are." Years later, a framed photo sat on the mantel of the Anderson home. In it, Michael and Liam stood side by side, their smiles radiant. Above the photo hung one of Liam's most treasured art pieces, a vibrant painting of their home, surrounded by lush trees and filled with light. Beneath the painting was a plaque that read, "For Mom, who taught us love, and for Dad, who taught me strength." The Andersons' story was one of pain and resilience, loss and love. But most importantly, it was a story of how bonds forged through hardship became unbreakable. Together, they had not only rebuilt their home, but also rediscovered the beauty of what it meant to be a family. The future was theirs, and it was bright. If you found Liam and Michael's journey of resilience and rediscovery as heartwarming and inspiring as we did, don't forget to share this story with your friends and loved ones. Stories like this remind us of the power of family, forgiveness, and hope, even in the toughest times. Stay connected for more stories that touch the heart, challenge the mind, and inspire action. Make sure to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you don't miss our next story. Let's spread positivity and strength together. What did you think of Liam and Michael's journey? Let us know in the comments below. Your thoughts mean the world to us, and if you have your own stories of resilience or family triumphs, we'd love to hear them. Thank you for being a part of our storytelling family. Until next time, stay hopeful, stay strong, and cherish the ones you love.